So let's look at the non-functional requirements, starting from security, right? We've already mentioned that you have some of these routes protected, right? So which means just not just anybody can access the endpoints, right? Which is cool.
Correct.
How would you um okay? How would you yeah? How would you mitigate SQL injection attacks?
How do you mitigate that?
Yeah,
I mean, like
and
for one,
sorry, you don't have to like type. Just like this, is just like a question. Yeah, so we
oh, a
don't.
question.
We don't
Okay, so to prevent that, well, for one, like you want to use at least, from my experience, there are libraries to help you solve this issue. So if you say you're using something like Node, you want to sanitize the actually no, let's not just say use a library. The answer I would say is we want to use some sort of we'll need to define a way to sanitize the request. Now, if we're using a library, right, or using a framework like Node, we can use the library for that to simplify the development process. If we're using a framework like Spring Boot, or we're using the Node Go standard library, right? By default, the this thing we used already helps us with that. The is built into the say for Go, right? The really Postgres library we use, right,
Yeah.
already does that for us. In Spring
Okay.
Boot, like JPA for using ORM, or Spring Data JDBC, sanitizes that for us by default. So we don't have to worry about that. But to answer your question, we would need to sanitize the request body.
All right. Um, is there any other way we can do that aside sanitizing the body? Um,
Like I mean, like when I say sanitize the body, I mean like
we
every single
strip it
request
of
that is a
code. Yeah.
string, we'll need to sanitize that. Do I know of any? I don't, as of right now. I don't know any other way. The only way I know is would be to sanitize the request, or the request body that is a string.
Body.
That's the way I know to solve that issue.
Okay.
Is
Okay.
do you know of any other way?
What other way? What other thing you can do on a in terms of like inserting to your database is to use parameterized queries.
Okay.
Yes, or use prepared statements instead of just writing the query directly and inserting user inputs inside of it. Right? Use parameterized
Yeah.
queries. So that's a safer way. But
Like a
that's just
DTO. Is
no,
that what you mean?
not a DTO. If you check your Spring Boot or your Node, there are ways you can prepare queries instead of just writing a full query and then concatenating the user input into the whole query. I don't know if you get my point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
just
read
search
that.
for parameterized
Go for
queries. Then my next question is in terms of the second thing when it comes to security. Where is it? Yeah. So how do you avoid or how do you handle spamming or
Okay.
something that can lead to a DDoS attack?
Okay. How do we handle this? There's different ways to handle this, but like the no-brainer, or like the simplest, would be to integrate Cloudflare into our application. So, or not into our application, into our deployment strategy, right? So we can deploy. Yeah, we would have a running instance in the cloud since we're going with a monolith approach, but within that um, within that monolith, right, we can either integrate, or within the instance itself, we can. There's something called Cloudflare tunnels, right? Which means we don't expose the HTTP or HT. Basically, we don't expose ports that are taking requests.
All
Cloudflare
right.
handles it that way through Cloudflare tunnels, or we can have our application sit in front of Cloudflare, right? And then Cloudflare proxies a request to our API, so that way we can hide our IP address. That's what I know to do, right? From my
Mm,
experience, um,
mm.
I don't.
Let,
I mean, I don't know any other.
let me
I
ask
mean, I don't know
another
any
question.
other. Okay,
So
okay,
yeah, I want to add make it more explicit. So let's say that we have a user that has logged in, has gotten their access token, right, and then decides to test your API, decides to um, submit reviews for a particular or submit bad reviews for a particular business, right, and start
okay,
making, say, hundreds of requests every minute using the create
okay,
review endpoint, right? How would you
okay.
handle that?
Okay, so we need some sort of rate limiting in that case, right? There's different types of rate limiting. Um, we would I'll just go with the simplest form, which would be based on the IP address, right? Okay, so said user is only allowed to make X amount of concurrent requests within a time frame, right? And then it's I think it's time based rate limiting. But to answer your question, yeah, we'll need to rate limit each request. That would be within the monolith, within our application. So it would be like a middleware, shall I say?
Yeah. So that's what
Does that make sense?
I was looking for. That's exactly what I was looking for.
Okay.
Okay, so let's talk about um, scalability. Right. Let's move to scalability. Right. So this it says that this system should be able to handle a large volume of reviews, right, and scale to accommodate future
Correct.
growth. Now, if we go back to what we have, right, you've mentioned that we can, so we have just one monolith, pretty much, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you mentioned that we want to scale that if need be, we are going to scale it vertically, which means we are going to increase the capacity of the server, right?
Correct.
Now, but you do know that,
That's just one of them. It's not the chosen one I'm going to go with, but that's
okay,
just one of them.
yeah. So if we want to handle more scale, considering the fact that there's a limit to how much you can scale vertically, right? Pretty much.
Correct. Yes.
And then we are looking at, I mean, Yelp. That's what we're looking at Yelp in this case, right? Um,
Correct.
what other thing do you think we can do? Let's say that we've scaled this thing to the max, right? And we need to scale more, right? Our system is still getting or is still crashing at peak hours.
Okay. Okay. So, well, in that case, let me just probe you based on the question. So, when you say crash, like it's crashing to, is it because
Because of too
we've
many requests.
okay, so we've hit we've hit the vertical ceiling in terms of
Yeah.
system. Okay, so like there's different routes I think we can go, right? So for the first route, or we can change the first route would be to change our deployment strategy, right? So we'll need to employ. Sorry, you said what?
No, no, continue. I'm with you.
Okay. I thought you said yeah. So we'll need to change our deployment strategy where we might need to incorporate a serverless way of deployment, right? Barring like say let's just say resources in terms of like monetary resources isn't that much of a problem, right? We can go the serverless route where um, that way we automatically handle the request, the scaling up our request because serverless it's pretty much um actually no, let me think about this. Well, first things first, a few things we want to do is we would need to employ some form of caching,
Hmm. Okay.
right? Caching in the terms of the terms of because we know for the most part, right? Or not for the most part, like there's a high chance that data will be a said user, right, might request the same type of data, right? So we'll need to cache that. We'll need to cache that. We can. since we have a monolith here, we don't want to do that in memory. So we'll need to employ a service like say Redis, or basically a NoSQL database to temporarily store items. I'm going to go
All
with
right.
Redis because it has a lot of inbuilt features like self-deleting based on the timer, so we don't have to worry about that. But yeah, so to address in terms of scalability, one of the ways we'll solve this is to use some sort of caching, so to
All
cache
right.
requests, payloads, right? And also, um, we might we might need to, if we don't go the serverless route, right? Say we're just using a single system, right? We will need to maybe break down these services into um, into maybe go for the microservice architecture, or we can
Mm-hmm.
still have. I was researching, even though I'm not going too deep into it. There's something called modular monolith,
Mm-hmm.
but like I'm not too keen on that. Let's just stick with um, microservice. I'm thinking out loud here. So we can say we have multiple backends within a load balancer, and then yeah, with our DB we can only infinitely scale to a particular point, right? And
Yeah.
we would also need some sort of some form of actually, you know what? When you say, let me just pose some questions for you. So
Okay.
I don't go into deep. So we're saying 1 million reviews per day. So it's that's like say within the business route, we're scaling to 1 million reviews per day. So 1 million saves per day. Is that what we're saying,
Yeah.
or like just in general 1 million reviews per day, like between saving and request?
1 million saves per day.
Okay, 1 million saves a day. That's actually very expensive. So we might need to introduce something called DB sharding, where we would break our database into multiple components.
So before we get to the database level, right?
Okay,
Let's, because if we have, even if we shard the database, for instance, or we partition it in some way, um, the problem still remains that we have one backend server, and most requests will not even get to database level, right?
correct.
Because the backend, yeah. So, do you think that, because I remember that you initially had like multiple backend servers and you had a load balancer, but then you had a
Correct.
concern that made you put it aside.
Correct.
Your concern was
Correct.
the database. How would all these different multiple servers connect to just one database?
Yeah. So I wouldn't want to go that route if we're suffering one request um crashing, right? And
Yeah.
then adding another backend monolith connecting to just one single DB, that wouldn't be very efficient. So we'll still face the same problem because with the database, we'll face into connection pooling, right? So I would say we'll need to break down this backend into microservices, and then we might go
Mm.
the route based on the request, or based on the description where we're saying we're saving multiple millions of requests per day, right? We'll need to go microservice route where each microservice owns its own database, right?
Okay. So does that
So
mean we are going to have multiple of, is that explain the concept of like independent databases for me, like in terms of like microservices. Is it that it's going to be the same database but it's duplicated across each microservice? What would the microservices look like? Yeah, just give me more details.
oh, okay. So it would be, I mean, again, like I'm thinking out loud here. So we can go in multi-schema, right? A multi-schema within the same database, right? Postgres has that. Assuming we're using Postgres, I'm pretty sure my SQL too has that, but it might be under a different connotation. But we would have, since we're going the microservice route, right? We would say each microservice has its own database, right? And then within the same database, right, it would be based off of schema. So each microservice has its own schema, connotation, right? It will have its own. Let me actually, I'm thinking out loud here. So what do we want to do? We can still retain the same table, the same. No need to add an extra schema. What choice do I want to make? But you know what? As long as I
So,
can defend my choice. So I would say I'll go with a microservice, right? We're not going to do the multi-schema routes until we hit a certain bottleneck, but we'll just go a single schema, single DB, but we'll have um, multiple. We'll have the microservice. We'll go the microservice. Why can't this? Okay, there we go. Say we have, say we have review service. Um, oh no, right, and then we have
question. If you look at the review service will be dealing with the review table.
correct.
And considering that we are still going to have 1 million rights, it means all those rights will still have to go to that same review table. And it also means that
Correct.
all
Yes.
the 1 million requests will still have to come through the review service.
Correct. That's a very good business. And let me think out loud for a second. So we have, let's call it,
So
say,
I'm giving us 10 more minutes to complete this so that we can get to
oh, okay,
yeah,
okay.
to the
Um,
feedback part.
I've never worked on anything of this scale, so this is a bit, it's very interesting. Um, so we can have a review and then this, so we can possibly go with each review owns its own DB, right? We can do that, and then the communication. Then we'll need to break this table down. Or actually, no, we can retain the same schema for the table, but we'll need to request data from said user service, and we would go for the best route, which would be gRPC. And let's just go with our gRPC communication. Let's go with gRPC because it's more efficient than REST binary protocol. Uh, so let's say, and then gonna oh no, gonna say. Now the question is, does this solve
Yeah, this is not going to solve our
this?
problem.
Pardon me?
It's still not going to solve our problem, I don't think.
Yeah, that was the question I was thinking out loud.
Hmm.
We'll need some form of caching, right? Let's just say cache.
So let me break it down, all right? So there are two
Okay,
problems pretty much that I mean off the top of my own head now that I'm emphasizing from having a lot of requests coming in at the same time. The first problem is that our server might not be able to handle that much requests at the moment.
correct,
The second thing is that the database having because while somebody is writing, somebody is reading from a database also, and that is a lot
correct,
of connections, a lot of strain on one database, right? And
correct,
so those are two different problems, right, that we need to
correct,
solve. There you go. So um, what I would suggest for for the first problem, which is we having a lot of requests. Let's say you are getting say 1,000 requests per minute, right? In that kind of scenario, there's a high chance your server, like maybe if you're using Golang, because Golang is crazy, sure. Honestly, that language can be crazy and very performant. But there's a high chance that you won't be able to handle it at once. So my suggestion, one thing we could do is to make use of message queues. Use something like RabbitMQ, MQ, or Kafka, right? And what
okay,
that does is that when a user makes a request to the API takes that request, validates it, does everything, ensure that the request is good, right? Sends the request to the queue, and then returns a response to the user. while there's a separate service that actually processes that request, saves the review, and the review ends up on the database. That way, the user doesn't have to wait until the review ends up in the database before getting a response. The user gets a response instantly while there's a separate service that is running to ensure that.
Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, I
Yeah.
see now. That makes sense. So
Mm,
you're essentially saying when it's a post request, right? We're going to validate the request, of course. Then
yeah.
we're going to then send that to a queue to be
AQ. Yes.
processed.
Yes.
To be processed. Then, if it's a read, okay, then we would have some sort of and maybe an API consuming that what do you call it, queue to
Yes. There'll be a
write.
service. Yes. Exactly. There'll be a service that
Because
does that.
like say like Kafka, I know it's high
Mm-hmm.
throughput, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's high throughput
Yeah.
essentially, right? It can consume a lot of requests.
Yeah.
Okay, I see. Then that way we basically tap. Oh, I see. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. So we
Yeah.
solve that issue of reading and write. That makes sense. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Ah, that's brilliant. That is brilliant. I can't
Yeah.
lie.
Just getting
That
it.
is brilliant. Nah, that's brilliant. Because when you mentioned Kafka, I'm like, wait, Kafka. What were you using Kafka here for? But yeah,
Yeah.
that is brilliant.
Yeah. So let me
Ah,
also
that's
address the
brilliant.
second one.
That's
Remember what you were trying to do by having multiple backends, like even though it's one monolith, right? You can have multiple of it. That's actually one thing you can do, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a microservice. You can have that your one monolith, right, and have multiple instances of it, and then you
correct.
had
Yeah.
a load balancer, just the way you did at the beginning. Now, your fear of how would why would I mean how would each of this, let's say you have four instances,
Connection pooling.
yes, connected into the same database. Now, that is why it's very important that we split. We have, like, we know what kind of operations we are dealing with, right? There is read operation, then there's write operations. Now, the write
Correct. Yeah.
operations are the ones that those are the ones that are very important, right? It is important that nothing happens to that data, right, up until when the data ends up in the database. Now, when it comes to database, we can have, and I'm sure you've read about database replicas, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So we can have one write instance, and then we can have multiple read instances. Now, for this kind of
Okay.
scenario, there is a high chance that we are going to have a lot more reads than writes. So if we are having 1 million writes, we are probably having maybe 4 million reads, right? Which means
More.
that we'll probably have four more replicas than write replicas. So it's usually safer to have just one write replica to ensure that your data is durable, right? There's no inconsistency in data, right? So every request that has to do with creating new reviews, maybe updating and maybe deleting, right, will go to the write replica. But every single request that has to do with reading, fetching out reviews, searching, and all those things goes to all the read
To
replicas.
the
That
read
way,
right.
you've essentially cut about it's about one third of the requests out from that right replica database, or sorry,
That makes
from that right
sense.
instance.
That
So
makes
yeah,
sense.
so that
That
would
makes
actually
a lot
go,
of
yeah, that would have solved a lot of things for you. And now, if you look at the other thing we have is we are looking at so the idea of the queue that I gave you, or that I shared, that would address performance, right? Because if you look at review submissions should have low latency within 1 second, right? If you're having a lot of requests that come in, there's almost like it's almost impossible for you to process
to speed
like
up. Yeah.
in 1 second, right? So you have to delegate some of these processes to a background process, and that's what queues does. Kafka can take in all the requests, right? So that the API can breathe and have time to breathe and process it at its own pace. Yes. So that's what that will do. And having multiple of your monoliths, right, will ensure that you have high availability. If for any reason one of the servers go down, you have like two
Right.
or three more servers that can pick up the
Right.
remaining requests, right? But if you have
Right.
just one, that's it.
Right.
So yeah, let me start with my feedback. Let me start with the things that I'll commend, right? So in terms of, okay,
Stop
where
sharing.
is
Can
it?
I stop sharing?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, this is. So let me expand my. Okay, I can see myself. All right. Okay, so yeah, in terms of just before. Okay, so what you wrote. Yeah. All right. Okay, so yeah, in terms of like clarifying questions, again, you did that well like, yesterday. You did that well today. Also, in terms of communication, yes, communication was great. Maybe too much. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I wouldn't say you should tone it down, right? I think it's just it's there. It's better to overshare than like to
Not
be in
to
that
share.
position where exactly when like your interviewer is trying to like get what you're trying to do. So in terms of the database schema, I think that was great to a very large extent. I didn't have much to even like talk about, or I didn't have much input, right, to give in terms of
Right.
the data schema. And then the API design, aside that REST thing, the ERL structure thing, and I think you just forgot that one because I'm sure you know it. Because when I mentioned it,
Yeah.
you immediately remembered.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one other thing I noticed is that you have good knowledge about like some of these concepts, right? And some of these libraries, some of these tools, some of them you've used before, some of them you've read about them, right? And you brought them out like it was clear that oh, it's either like you've used this one before because you were mentioning that oh, this is the particular tool I would use in this case, and you were able to use that to substitute like times where you were unsure of like maybe the concept, then you give an example of like the tool that actually like does it. So I think that was a great one because it's always I always advise and I also do that when at times when I'm asked a question and I don't know, maybe I know that concept, but I don't know how to explain it.
Explain
So
it.
I
Yeah.
would try to say, okay, oh, I've used something that does this before, and this was how, yeah. So that is very nice. What else? And yes, the rate limiting answer you gave, that was good. That was what I was looking for the first time that you gave the response of like Cloudflare. And that was why I decided to rephrase my question. I realized that okay, maybe I didn't phrase it well enough for you to get my points the first time. And then you got exactly what I wanted to hear the second
Yeah.
time. And then okay, so yeah, so to the things I would advise, like in terms of like improvement. So I think you spend a lot of time on system design videos, right?
Okay.
I'm trying to see if there's someone I can recommend. There's this guy. I'll look for his YouTube channel. I've practically watched every system design video this guy has on his channel. Like literally, there's almost none of the videos there that I've not seen. So I'll look for it. He's an Indian guy. I'll look for it. The guy was a staff engineer at Pinterest. I can't remember
Wow.
his
Yeah,
name.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I can imagine the type of work. Yeah, that's something like I know I would struggle with like system design because I haven't. Although I've used resources in personal stuff, I haven't really worked on
Yeah.
anything of large scale. Like I know about queues, but like I have never implemented a solution using queues. So the moment you brought that up,
Mm,
I'm like,
yeah.
I can't lie, I'm still wild about that. Because like
Mm,
that solved the whole problem. And then the read replica. Because yeah, you definitely
yeah.
no that I can't yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, I need to go back to the drawing
Yeah.
board.
Yeah. So I'm trying to help you get the that guy's. Yes. Okay. Yeah. What is his name? Is this his name? Ryan. It can be Ryan. This guy is one Indian guy. What's his name? Let me really just get that. Yeah, that is not his name. He was just in the Rahul. Yes, Rahul Pandi. Pandi. Rahul Pandi. Yeah,
Rahul.
Rahul
I
Pandi.
see it. Is
Yes.
it
So
WRH
yes.
or RAU?
Uh, so just hold on. I'm just going to send the link. I'm just going to share the link with you here. So check it out. Check the guy out. So yeah, check him out. So the reason why I said that is that in terms of knowing where to start, right?
Correct.
And knowing what the interviewer is expecting. So it's important that for each interview, you know that this is what this interviewer is expecting, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So you might even know the answer, like you might understand everything, but if you don't know what the interviewer is expecting, right, you might not be able to put it in a way that the interviewer would like follow up or would be
Oh
pleased.
yes.
Okay, yeah, so and you will get an idea of it once you will start watching these videos. You will get a good idea of what when we say high level design, low level design, right? So you will know, okay, when someone say, "Oh, give me an high level design of this thing." There's so that's that. Then number two, yes. Oh, one thing you did that I like is when you mentioned that you will be using relational DB, right? I love the fact that you told me straight up, like it was because you have more experience with relational database. See, there are interviews that was my answer. I'm telling you, like when they ask me, "Oh, why are you using this particular database?" I've used this so too much for me not to use it. Like I know everything about this database. That's why I'm using it, right?
Yeah.
Even though there are pros and cons, and maybe some databases are more suited for certain things than others. I always believe that, and I still do, right? There's You can build anything with anything,
Correct. Yeah.
literally, right? The way we say that, oh, maybe for payments, people use relational database. I've seen payment companies, I've seen someone build a payment app with MongoDB. Like there are always ways around it. So I love the fact that your response was you have more experience about it. I mean, you have more experience with it. It's good to be that natural and not try to defend what is not there, right? Yeah. So
Correct. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I love
Correct.
that. Okay, but I also mentioned that you should probably read up on. I, I mean, it might not come up in your interview really, but if it does, it's nice just to know it. Read up on differences between SQL and no SQL databases. What are the pros and cons? In what kind of situation or scenario would you prefer to, or should you prefer to use no
Correct.
SQL? In what kind of situation should you prefer to use SQL? Also, let me mention that there are situations where you have to use both.
Correct. Yes. Yes. I agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you should also be yeah. You should also be open to like discussing that. Um,
Correct.
Okay, then yes, during the course of the interview, although I believe it's because it's a mock interview, you probably won't do that in an actual interview.
Yeah.
You went on Google and you went to
Mention.
research.
I should not do it.
Yeah,
I should not do that.
I
Yeah.
just wanted to mention that so that yeah. Then so there were a couple of times you also mentioned there was this tool in Java. As much as it's good, right?
I should speak to. Yeah. I
Right.
remember you saying that yesterday. I should
Yeah,
speak
I know that
to
you're still struggling
Chrome.
to get
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah. Yeah. I can't lie. Yes, I
it's
have.
it's yeah, it's always great to you want to system design is about concepts, not so much the language. Whatever it is I'm able to come up with when it comes to system design, I should be able to use it anywhere, anyhow. Maybe subsequently focus more on those concepts than the actual. Maybe once in a while you can mention a tool, right? Maybe to just make your point, but focus more on the concept, right? Then the next thing is yes, for everything that you want to mention, right? Make sure that you understand the why behind it, right? Although I'm giving this feedback based like, generally because it's a different thing if we put your experience in consideration. You
Correct.
get it's a different thing because when we put your experience in consideration, we'll see that okay, you haven't like had so much experience working on like some of these big systems, so it makes sense that you will make certain mistakes. It makes sense that oh, you will not understand certain concepts. Yes.
Correct.
But
Yeah.
I'll not use that to judge you, right? I'm judging you generally so that you can use that to level up. So
Correct.
always understand like the reason why. So I always say that whatever it is you are doing, if you are going to tell me, say for instance, I'm using a load balancer, most probably I will ask you what's a load balancer, what does it do? Why are you using load balancer? Why not using API gateway? Right? I can be like that for people that I work with. Obviously not in a system design interview, right? Because we don't have the time to be probing all those things, right? But pretty much you want to show your interviewer that you actually understand this thing, right? You understand this thing. And I understand that you're at that point where you don't understand like some of these things, but I'm letting you know that okay, yes, you need to get to that point where you actually do, right? And like yeah, um, so understand the way I've mentioned that. Then details. When it comes to details, there's certain details you don't have to share, right? And again, you will get this from watching those videos, right? Because there are times that when you share more details than necessary, it might just take more time, right? I remember when I had like the same system design with one of my friends recently, right? He mentioned in his design, he mentioned load balancer, and then he started explaining what load balancer does. Now, I did not ask him. Know that your interviewer most probably knows most of what you're talking about. So you get. There are some people that likes to explain. You explain like you're explaining to a 2-year-old, right? And it is good. But because we don't have that time during interviews, right? So at times just touch on it and move. Let your interviewer now be the one to say, oh, you mentioned this. Can you explain more about it? Then you now come back and explain. So you get. So yeah, in a bit to keep up with your time, just mention certain things. Then if you feel the need to explain a little and then move, right? Or you can ask the interviewer, do you think should I explain more about this or should I explain this, right? Then the interviewer can give you a go ahead. Oh, explain more about this, right? Tell me about this. Tell me about the decision you made here, right? So most times, see, when in doubt, just ask the interviewer, should I explain this or should I do this? So you get so in terms of the indexing. Now, the indexing was nice. I loved how you explained it, right? It showed that you actually have like some of the theoretical knowledge, right? Although I could see the gaps in what you were saying because I knew that okay, because that practical experience is not there. You indexed the business name, right?
Correct.
Which is good. It's not bad, right? But there are times in most cases that's not something we are going to index straight away, right? In like um, in my experience, right, certain things we let them happen first, right? So we don't
Correct.
index certain. Yeah, we just don't make assumption and then we index. It's possible that we don't get to that point where we need an index. So you get so one thing that should obviously be indexed is the ID, which it will be indexed automatically because it's a primary key. So you get, but when it comes to other things, right, you want to ensure that okay, there is actually a problem that now prompts you to index it and say, okay, this is a solution for it. Right. Now to how okay, yes. So the thing about microservices, so you mentioned serverless, you mentioned microservices, right? I think I will advise you read more on microservices. Just understand serverless on a general level, right? Personally, I don't know much about serverless, right?
Okay.
Personally, I don't, right? And I'm saying this to be honest with you, and so that you can also know that it's not really about how many of these things we know. It's about the ones we know, how much of it do you actually know? Like, I always tell people that, see, there are things that I don't know. And what I don't know, I don't know it. But you see what I know, eh? I know it. Like, when I tell you that I know something, you will know that I know it, right? Even in the way I speak, you would know. It will be so evident that the little I know, you will hire me for it. And I can learn anything in a very short amount of time. That is my strong suit. So I don't need to learn certain things because my job does not require it. When my job requires it, I will learn it and I'll be fine. Here you get. So make
Correct.
sure that you're not just picking up some of these things because okay, they are there, right? Ensure that okay, the little that you know, right, you know it in depth. So you get because it will even help you with learning the other things. Then you mentioned gRPC. I understand that you have like experience with gRPC, right? I've never really used gRPC in a production environment, but I've tried it before, right? So I
It
know what
wasn't,
it
yeah,
does.
same. It wasn't a production environment. It was, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So So yeah, it's good that you know that one actually. I think it's nice. Um, I think it's nice. It's just that on a scale of, and I need to say this, on a scale of preference or on a scale of priority, right? Knowledge like gRPC, knowledge like serverless, they are very low on the ladder, right? Yes, there are other things that are very important that once we know those other things, then we can now start talking about gRPC, even microservice, serverless, right? If you know how to, you see, microservice is a way to actually scale your application, but there are a lot of businesses that run on monolith and they service millions of users. Why? Because their engineers, they know the ins and outs of monolith. Whatever it is that they have built, they know the ins and outs. They know exactly how to manipulate it to get the result they need. Right. I'm
Mm,
trying to say that it doesn't have to be one particular. See, when it comes to software engineering, it is there's no one way to do it. There's no one
yeah,
way to do it, really.
that I understand. There's multiple ways to solve a problem. Yes.
Exactly. I think wasn't Netflix moved to microservice architecture maybe last 2 years, right? That was when they just moved to microservice, which means they were running a monolith, right?
Yeah. This company, Stack Overflow, is a monolith.
Yes, exactly. You say
Is a
Stack
monolith.
Overflow is a monolith, so it doesn't have to be microservice, right? Unlike what a lot of people think that oh you quickly no. Know enough, right? And make sure that when you are moving to microservice, it is justified. And that's why I suggest that book. I recommend that book. It really help you. Now to the thing about the queues thing. See, the reason why you missed it, or the reason why you didn't think of that solution, is because, or the reason why I was able to tell you is because of practical experience.
Right.
Nothing can replace it. Honestly, the only edge I have, or the only edge I had to be able to think of that, and you not be able to think about it, is because of the places I've worked, right? The project I've worked on. That's the only thing. Nothing special, honestly. There are certain things you won't be able to think of if you haven't done certain things. Like, okay, so yesterday, for instance, I was saying certain things, and it triggered certain solutions in your head. My point is just that like that practical experience is very important, and don't beat yourself up too much about it. That's my point, because you will get to know all these things by the time you start working on certain projects. By the time you get jobs at certain companies, it will just come, like, because you will see how some systems that were built before you joined the company, you see how they were built,
Right.
right? You see how they were built. See, oh, this is how they do this, is how they do that. And that would actually influence how you now do things from then
Right.
onward. You will learn, yeah, you meet people and things like that. So it's just experience. I just want to like clarify that it's nothing special. It's just like I've seen different systems, so I just knew okay, this is how we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do that. There you go.
Right.
So yeah, so I think that's my feedback
Feedback.
generally. On a general level, I think you did well, right? Considering the experience you have, right? I think you
Right.
did well considering the experience you have. But if you take, like I said, if you read more, if you read books, like the book I suggested, if you watch those videos, there's certain things you will learn from those videos that it will just be part of you. Like
Part
you
of
don't
it.
need
Yeah.
you don't need hands-on. In fact, the thing I said about like experience about the OQ thing is still something you can learn from those videos, right? Because if you watch videos where they talk about, let's say, designing Twitter, for instance, right? Designing a Twitter clone, designing Instagram, right? I've watched a lot of those videos, right? And it will open you to just, oh, the possibilities. Oh, this is possible. This is possible. Then if this is possible, that means this is also possible, right? So yeah, that's just it. But I think it was a great one. So that is the end of this mock interview session. I hope it was helpful, and I hope you guys learned something from it. Um, Apologies for the video taking so long. Like I said in the last video, it had to be that long because the purpose of the mock interview was so that he can learn from it and it wouldn't have made any sense if we just stop after 30 minutes without passing anything across. So once again, apologies. Um, Subsequently, I'll make sure to keep to time. And like I said in the last video, if you are interested in having a mock interview session with me, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I will also attach my email to this video. I'm going to be releasing another mock interview session very soon, but this time is going to be with someone that is more experienced. So look out for that video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, keep believing, keep growing, and keep glowing. Peace.